Hi, I'm Scott Starrett with Starrett Wealth Management, a part of Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. So today we're fortunate to have someone that may be no stranger to everyone watching, either one of two ways. I have talked to our guest a couple of times before, and you can see on his previous chats how reticent he has been with some of the things that were happening at the time in the markets and in the U.S. political situation. And you may have also seen him on many news and business talk shows all around North America. Greg Valliere is the Chief US Policy Strategist for AGF. Greg has spent a significant amount of his time living just outside of Washington, D.C., and I would say is incredibly connected to the political situation in the States. And he also has an expertise in the Federal Reserve and what tends to happen during the conversations with interest rate setting that the FOMC goes through every so often. So, Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you.
So I wanted to get right into, I mean, there's a lot of, and there will continue to be a lot of news being made here almost hourly regarding what's happening in your country with the race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump for presidency. So maybe why don't we start by, to term a phrase from you folks down south, but what is the state of the union currently as you see it?
It's very confused, Scott. I think people have been faked out two or three times by a shift in momentum. We had Joe Biden do poorly in a debate, and then he dropped out. Then you had Kamala Harris. She's now doing pretty well. But in the last few days, I sense that her polls have leveled off. And Donald Trump is still very much alive in this race. It's going to be a cliffhanger. And I must tell you, if this is a 1 or 2 point race, Trump could win it, and or we could have close to a tie and go through all the nonsense we had a few years ago with recounts and charges of voter fraud. It could be another crazy finish to this election.
So, that brings up to another point. I mean, the polling and what the polling sometimes the media really focuses on is national polls. But the reality is national polls don't mean a whole bunch because of course you have big states like California and New York that traditionally, and it appears this time as well, will go heavy Democratic or Democrat. I mean, um, where the
Yeah.
battleground states and which one should if people are watching what's really happening with the election, what one should in your opinion they concentrate on?
It's got to be Pennsylvania, a very, very close race. 3 or 4 weeks ago, the Harris was up in Pennsylvania by 4 or 5 points. Now it's tied. That has a lot of her advisors worried. Several other states to watch: Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona. There are 7 or 8 states, Georgia. There are 7 or 8 states that will determine the outcome. I mean, the name of the game, as you know, is to get to 270 electoral college votes. And that is going to be very, very close.
So, I mean, one of the biggest risks, and maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but one of the bigger risks tend to be less about whether it's a Harris presidency and a Trump presidency. I mean, they each bring their own risks to markets and to other parts of the world or other factors. But this contested election, and Trump after
Yeah.
2020 is definitely more prone, let's just call it, to contest an election that he loses. But how you've kind of indicated that a risk of a contested election is definitely there, as at least right now. What do you see is that a risk to the market? Is that a risk we have to pay attention to when it comes to how things are looking?
Well, I'd make 2 points, Scott. Number one, yes, the markets could see a lot of volatility, a lot of litigation, This could drag into the winter. You have to have a new president by January 20. Well, this could drag into January. So that's one factor. The other factor here is that for people who worry about this election and the impact on the countries and the markets, whatever, I always say to them, don't be that worried, like, oh my God, Donald Trump's going to win, or oh my God, Kamala Harris is going to win. It's they don't have enough votes in Congress to get a lot done. And it looks to me as if the congressional races will show that things pretty much frozen there as well. It'll be as tight as a whisker. So I do think that if you worry about a radical left wing agenda or a radical right wing agenda, my response would be don't worry that much because there's not enough votes to get it through Congress.
Okay. So that's a good point. I want to kind of delve into that a little bit deeper. But, when we look at Congress right now, there's of course the Senate and the House, and I'll come back to that in a second. But my first question is, over the last 10 years, there seems to have been more of a um, I would say a push from the executive branch, i.e., the presidency, to use presidential orders from that branch to kind of direct the direction where things are going to go. Some of those orders have been defeated in the courts. Some have been successful. Why do you is it because of this kind of gridlock in all the sides of government that's being used more and more, or is it purely a political motive that we're just hearing about now, and really these presidential orders have been used more and more?
I think it's probably more the latter. I think that everyone knows things are very, very tight. Trump will take advantage of that. And by the way, Scott, I don't rule out Trump uh, going to court. It's having a major legal battle, claiming a voter fraud, claiming irregularities at the polls. There could be a lot of allegations as this election comes to an end.
Right. Okay. So going back to the Senate and the House. So as it stands right now, the Democrats control the House. Not to a great extent, but they officially control the House, and
Yeah.
sorry, it's the Senate. The House being controlled by the Republicans at this point. Where are the polls kind of leading in this way right now?
I think it's a fairly safe call that the Senate, which is 51 to 49 Democrat, will flip back to the Republicans. There are three or four Republicans who look extremely vulnerable, and I can't find one, three or four Democrats who look vulnerable. I can't find one Republican who looks vulnerable at all. I think all the incumbent Republicans will win. So I think there's a decent chance when this election is over, we'll be back to 51-49 Republican.
Okay. And for some people that aren't as familiar with the U.S. Political system, how much power does the Senate have in deciding the direction of the country versus the presidency or the House?
The Senate has a lot of clout. They have clout to confirm Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, a wide range of legislation, of course, both houses get involved in. But I would say that the ability to confirm a lot of these folks, especially judges, is a pretty big deal.
Right. And that's one thing that Trump has received a lot of accolades on from the right, and especially the religious right, in pushing through a lot of judicial appointments during his first presidency, and making the judges quite young
Yeah.
and conservatively focused. And I mean, you look at the Supreme Court, and of course that's pretty obvious. But even going down to all the way through, that seems to have been a big what some would consider a success in his first presidency.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you look at some of these young judges, some of them are going to be on the court for another 25 or 30 years.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Um, let's just move a little bit more towards the markets. Of course,
Yep.
I've been saying to clients and to anybody who'll listen that I think this the next few months are going to be quite volatile. Not going to pick a direction because I don't think we can. One thing we've learned over the years is markets will do their thing, but definitely the volatility is going to pick up. Um, what have you been hearing or what have you been sharing with and advising AGF as it applies to where they may position some of their investments? And I know I don't want to get into the weeds because I know you don't really talk a whole bunch
Sure.
about individual investments, but just in general.
Well, you could make a case that the most powerful person in Washington is not Trump, not uh, Harris. It's the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell. And I think Jerome Powell is going to play an enormous role for the markets in the next few months. We're going to get some medicine next week. I think that's pretty likely. We'll get some more medicine 2 days after the election, and we'll probably get a little more medicine around the holidays. So I would think at least three rate cuts, probably more next year, will have a huge impact on the markets, on the economy. And in some respects, I think that Powell is, I wasn't being facetious. I think Powell is the most powerful person in Washington right now.
That's a good point, and it would appear as though that concerns Trump, um, because he has said,
Yes,
many times,
right.
the president should have a decision to be made on interest rates, and of course, Trump as a real estate investor, real estate investors like low interest rates. It's cheap to borrow money
Oh,
and
yeah.
build and buy things. So, I mean, Harris is more traditional in this way, or it appears to be. But what effect do you think either president would have, at least in the medium term? Because again, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, I think he's up, I want to say
Yeah.
2027, is it, or 2026? But, in the
Six,
medium
six. Yeah.
term, yeah, what
Yeah.
effect will a new president have on that role?
Well, I'd say there are two, three really big issues the markets will have to look at. Number one is the enormity of spending. Both Harris and Trump could care less about the deficit. They're indifferent toward the deficit. So I would say we're going to continue with annual deficits of close to $2 trillion a year. That is not sustainable. At some point, the bond market or the credit rating agencies will get very grouchy about this. So you will see a lot more spending. I have yet to hear either candidate talk much about restraining spending. It's about increasing spending. So that's one. Another thing early on will be a protectionism. I think that both parties are pretty much in agreement that tariffs are a good thing. I think they're a terrible thing. I think it's a tax on individuals, but I think you'll see a lot of tariffs and a lot of talk about that. And of course, there's always regulatory policy right away. And lest we forget, there's also geopolitics and geopolitics, whether it's Ukraine or Gaza or Beijing. I think there'll be a lot of friction there as well.
Right. Good. One of the things that, I mean, you've traveled extensively through Canada.
Yep.
So kind of the last area I kind of wanted to hit on, unless I think of something else through what you say, is going to be the relationship between Canada and the US. We depending on who you talk to, and depending on what happens in Canada, quite frankly, with our prime minister or political situation, could depend upon which side would be a better fit. What is your view on whether it's a Trudeau kind of led, continuation, or whether it's maybe a more conservative bent to our country versus Harris or Trump, or does it matter?
I think it does matter, Scott. You've got, first of all, someone in Kamala Harris who spent many of her teenage years in Canada. She lived in Montreal when her mother taught at McGill. And I'm told in private, uh, Harris is quite complimentary of Canada. She has fond memories of your country. If it's Trump, well, we'll see how much longer we have Trudeau in office. Trump and Trudeau really, really don't like each other, as you know. And I do think there could be friction over Canada's contribution to the to NATO. The U.S. would like to see a bigger contribution. There could be issues of, including uh, parts of electric vehicles that are made in the US, how much is made in Canada. There are immigration disputes. There are basic trade disputes. So I think if Trump wins and Trudeau is still in office, there would be real friction. If Trump wins and we get a new conservative Canadian leader, well, the jury is still out. I think there might be an effort to mend fences right away.
Okay, great. Um, yeah, so one of the last thing I should say to ask about is, to put you on the spot. And, if we had this conversation a week ago, it'd probably be a different answer, but who's going to win?
Who's going to win? I thought for the last few weeks it would be Harris, and I've been taken aback at her lack of momentum. And I've always said, all of my friends know that I say you underestimate Trump at your own peril. That said, I'm going to say in a squeaker and a narrow outcome, I think Harris will win, largely because she has tremendous support among women, among young people, among African Americans, among Hispanics. She really does have enthusiasm in a lot of these key groups. And I think a lot of people are tired of Donald Trump's act. It's all about insults. He says that she's a lunatic. He says that she's a communist. I think people are tired of Trump's act and would like something a little different.
And we'll leave it at that. And
Okay.
thank you very much for your time. Obviously, your insight is much appreciated, and we should effort to get this available as soon as possible because after the debate tomorrow, who knows what's going to happen? Um,
Who knows?
you know, things can change
Right.
completely again. So, but thanks, Greg, for your
They
time.
could.
And Greg is available, and he does communicate a lot to people within AGF, but more importantly to people like myself as advisors. So, if you do want to know down the road any updates on what Greg thinks, please do reach out to anyone on the Stera team. We'll be happy to share what his recent musings will be. Greg, enjoy the rest of September and election watching.
Always enjoyable talking to you. I had a good time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye bye.